What's up, everyone? Welcome to this day in Philly sports history for January 12th, 2023. I think we officially have a Flyers problem. They just are not losing the right way. They played the Capitals last night. They won 5-3 down at the Wells Fargo Center. And in and of itself, I guess big picture, it's not that bad, but they're kind of on a streak right now. And they're 7-3 in their last 10 games. They've won their last two, and they're slowly creeping up the standings. They are now 24th in the league, only 2 games out of the 20th spot. But more discouraging is the fact that they are creeping slowly and getting much closer to being in that conversation for the wild card spot. Currently, Pittsburgh is the second wild card in the NHL with 48 points. The Flyers have 41. Not good. And this is basically a disaster compared to where we were at the beginning of the season. We don't necessarily need or want them to continue winning because we need one of those draft picks. And as they're built, they're just not good enough to win. So I don't know if this is they started off hot like this because of new coach and everything like that. Maybe they're kind of I don't know. It's worth monitoring because it's not good, especially when you want to get one of those top 3 picks. But Flyers won 5-3 last night. I believe Carter Hart was in goal. So, I mean, your goalie's playing well. You just don't have anybody right now to match with him, and that's what you want to get one of those draft picks for. So, like I said, not a good situation, and they're very, very close to creeping into that conversation, which they're definitely, I believe, not good enough to get one of those wild card spots. So the fact that they're even creeping into being in contention, or as the NFL always does with their standings, in the hunt, you don't want that because that's basically purgatory for a franchise, no matter what the sport is. Anyway, pretty quiet on the Eagles front. Like I said, it's going to be a quiet week, which is perfectly fine. But speaking of playoffs, tonight we will be recording a new Back to the Future. So for those of you who still don't necessarily know, you're listening to this is This Day in Philly Sports History. This is the daily pod I do, which focuses on one specific day, an event that happened on that day in Philly sports. Back to the Future, we take a broader, bigger view of more of either an event, a season, an era. It's Back to the Future with a PH. Check that out wherever you get your podcasts. It's also available on YouTube. So follow me on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Jimbo_Mont, Instagram, Philly Jimbo. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the NFL playoffs, give my pick for each of the games, go over what we think and how I think the Eagles are going to play out. And then we have a special what if, because that's the premise of Back to the Future. We ask what if X happened instead of Y. Tonight we're going to focus on Howie Roseman and a lot of his offseason moves and just how we got to this point with Howie. So be on the lookout. I'm going to tape that later this afternoon when I get done my day job, and it should be up later this evening. But on this day in Philly sports history, 2 days ago, we talked about Mike Schmidt getting inducted into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. On this day in 1994, January 12th, 1994, Steve Carlton was announced as a Hall of Famer. This was a year previous to Mike Schmidt, but Lefty pitched 7 years in St. Louis before he came to Philly, helping them win a World Series in 1967. I didn't realize he pitched that long in St. Louis, which is kind of crazy. But in 1972, he wasn't the Steve Carlton we know now when he was with St. Louis, though. So they traded Steve Carlton to the Phillies because he was not happy with his contract in St. Louis and threatened to hold out. The owner's just like, look, I can't deal with this. So they traded him to the Phillies for Rick Wise, which at the time, stat-wise, not very. It was a pretty even trade. 2 guys going to go to a new city, get a change of scenery. It seems like it always helps. But after that trade is when Steve Carlton here, if you're watching, here they were until 1972. Here's Rick Wise, and then here's Steve Carlton. He just went crazy once he got to the Phillies. 15 years with the Phillies, 241 wins, a 3.09 ERA, over 3,000 strikeouts, winning 4 Cy Youngs, 72, 77, 80, and 82. He won the World Series in 80 for them. Even won a Gold Glove as a pitcher to boot, which is pretty cool. 7-time All-Star. But other than that World Series, which I think until recent, probably the past 15 to 20 years, was one of the biggest moments in Phillies sports history, or Phillies team history, I should say. 1972 was Steve Carlton's just amazing year. So his first year with the Phillies, he went 27-10 with a 1.97 ERA, which is like unheard of. But it gets better. 30 complete games, 310 Ks. Now, very, very good season. Back then, the pitchers were different. They kind of just they just pitched until their arms fell off. But what's even more, he pitched 27 games, or won 27 games, I should say. The Phillies only won 59. So he was a part of 46% of their wins, roughly, which is insane. So it just shows how good he was versus how bad and shitty the team was. And a lot of the players that would end up winning the World Series with them in 1980 were very young at this time. So they were kind of coming into their own. Other things about Steve Carlton, he stopped talking to the media in 1973, the year after, because he kind of had an off year, so to speak, by his standards. And so the media was questioning, like, oh, well, you have a quirky training regimen, and which I couldn't find out what that was. It was just they were questioning what his training was. So he's like, screw you, I'm not talking to you. So nobody really got to know him. Like, he literally the whole time, 15 years he was in Philly, never talked to the media. But he was the last pitcher to throw for 300 innings in a major league season, which now if a pitcher gets to 200, it's saying something. One thing I did want to mention, going back to, I mentioned the 1980 season. Everybody talks about Mike Schmidt, Manny Trio, Tug McGraw, and Pete Rose in that playoff run. But in that postseason, Steve Carlton started 4 games, went 3-0, 23 strikeouts, and with a 2.30 ERA. Not too bad, to be honest. But everybody talks about those other guys where Carlton just quietly just was dominant. Cole Hamels like almost in that postseason. So very cool. One thing I always remember about Steve Carlton is my buddy Rob, who's a regular listener. What's up, brother? His dad, when we were kids growing up, he had a dog, Lefty, who was named after Steve Carlton, which was pretty cool. And the cool thing about that dog was he always had a ball in his mouth. Like, he'd always come up to you and want to play fetch and whatnot. So shout out to Lefty. Rob, hope that brought a smile to your face today. But back to Steve Carlton. His number 32 is retired by the Phillies. He's in their Wall of Fame. They actually have a statue outside of Citizens Bank Park of him. And one of the few that they have him, Schmitty. There's one of Harry Callis inside. There's a Richie Ashburn statue. And then they have those other statues out front that were out in front of the vet before. But another cool thing, and just because I was listening to the book, I know Bo Jackson's first major league hit came off of Steve Carlton when he was pitching for the White Sox after he was released by the Phillies. When he retired, Steve Carlton was number 2 on the all-time strikeout list and the number 1 left-hander. Currently, he sits at number 4 and the number 2 left-hander behind Randy Johnson. It's, in case you're wondering, because I know some of you are like getting ready to look it up, it's Nolan Ryan, Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens, and Steve Carlton. Johnson and Clemens might be switched, but those are the top 4. But yeah, I mean, that 1972 season it was just insane that he won 46% of the Phillies' wins that year. But on this day in Philly sports history, back in 1994, Steve Carlton was officially announced as a Major League Baseball Hall of Famer, playing most of his good years of his career with the Phillies. Flyers, I don't know what they're doing, but they figure it out. But don't forget to check out Back to the Future later this evening, NFL playoff, Eagle playoff preview, and we talk a little bit about Howie Roseman. Go have yourselves a Thursday, and until next time, I'll see you when I see you.